Hi everybody, it's Peter Schiff. It is Tuesday, February 15th, 2011. Well, I wanted to talk about President Obama's budget proposal for, fiscal 2012. The president has been making the rounds. He's done quite a few press conferences to brag about his courage and his commitment to reining in out-of-control deficit spending, to forcing the government to behave like an American family and live within its means. Very few American families that do that these days either. But the reality is, this whole thing is a farce. I mean, first of all, he is talking about 1.1 trillion in cuts. In fact, he's saying they're slashing 1.1 trillion from the deficit. Well, where's this number coming from, 1.1 trillion? Well, that's how much the president claims they're cutting over the next 10 years. 10 years? I mean, what about this year? What are they cutting now? I mean, 1.1 trillion over 10 years, that's 100 billion a year. Well, the budget is 3.7 trillion. That's what they're spending. This year's deficit, 2011, is 1.6 trillion. They're talking about cutting 100 billion? I mean, that's nothing. I mean, all the 100 billion represents what, less than 3%, 2.5% of the budget? I mean, it's a rounding error. I mean, it's nothing to brag about. In fact, if they have one assumption that's off by a decimal point, that's it. There's no savings at all. In fact, the only reason that they want to talk about a 10-year period is because the savings are so small. They're trying to manufacture a big number. But all that really counts is this year, because the president can't bind future presidents and future Congresses. Who knows what they're going to spend 5 or 10 years from now? The only thing that counts is what they do right now. In fact, if they were to cut 1.1 trillion from this year's deficit, it wouldn't even eliminate it, because it'd still be 400 billion. This 1.6 trillion is a record. No, this is all smoke and mirrors. To think that the government can even project on the economy 5 or 10 years out. The real reason that there's 1.1 trillion in cuts, it's not because the president is actually cutting any spending. It has to do with these rosy economic assumptions that the president is making, that have a prayer of actually coming true. I spoke about this a lot on my radio show today at the schiffradio.com. So rather than repeating all that, you got to go and listen to that show, because they make these crazy assumptions on what interest rates are going to be for the next 10 years, what inflation is going to be for the next 10 years, what unemployment is going to be for the next 10 years, what the GDP growth rate is going to be for the next 10 years. They have no clue. I mean, they don't know what it's going to be next year, let alone 10 years from now. And of course, what they assume is just pie in the sky, never even going to happen. But, think about, what was President Obama projecting the 2011 deficit would be in 2010? They were projecting about 1.2 trillion. So it came in 400 billion higher. They weren't even close. They were off by 400 billion 1 year away. How are they going to get 10 years worth of deficits to within 100 billion a year? About economic forecasting, they couldn't forecast the biggest recession since the Great Depression. They couldn't forecast the financial crisis of 2008 in 2007. So how do they know what's going to happen over the next 10 years? They don't. That's the truth. They're clueless. This thing is a farce. They don't want any real budget cutting. They want to continue business as usual. In fact, President Obama actually has new spending in the bill. Of course, he's calling it investment, because spending is bad, right? But investment is good. Yes, investment is good when it happens in the private sector. It's bad when the government spends money and calls it investments. Government doesn't invest. It spends. See, in the private sector, if there's an investment and it's bad, right? If somebody combines land, labor, and capital in a way that doesn't efficiently satisfy human demands, there's a loss there, and the activity comes to an end. If they do it right, then they make a profit, and they expand the activity, and they command more resources. But in government, when government screws up, there is nothing to put it to an end. It just continues in perpetuity, because the government can fund itself with taxes or borrowing or printing. And so we don't want the government to invest money. We want the government to stop spending so that the private sector can invest. In fact, the one area that the president wants to invest in is education. Well, part of the problem is we are spending too much money right now and flushing it down the educational bureaucratic rat hole. That's what we're doing. We're not educating anybody. Yes, we're keeping a lot of kids in school, probably longer than they need to be. There are a lot of kids that are in school right now that would probably be better off working and earning a trade. We have too many people in college. The president wants even more people to go to college so that we can have more unemployed college graduates, or have more college graduates driving taxi cabs or ringing cash registers. We don't need that. All of the money that is being diverted from government to education is money that can't be used to grow the economy, to create jobs for the people who are trapped in this educational bureaucracy. And unfortunately, the Republicans aren't much better. Yeah, they want to make a few more cuts, but it's still peanuts compared to what needs to be done. Nobody wants to address entitlements. No one wants to talk about cutting or actually cut Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. No one is talking about making some serious cuts to defense. All this is, tinkering around the edges. It is not going to head off this economic collapse. It is coming, and it's coming in large part because nobody in Washington, neither President Obama or Republicans in Congress, are willing to do what it takes to level with the American people and put their own political butts on the line and propose a budget that actually cuts government spending in a meaningful way and addresses all of the other rules and regulations that have so undermined our economy and that are responsible not only for the economic collapse of 2008, but the far greater economic collapse that still lies ahead. And that will come far before the 10-year projections, phony projections, ever come about. But anyway, go to schiffradio.com and listen to what I talk about. It's really incredible what they're assuming. One other thing I wanted to talk about today was the takeover of the New York Stock Exchange by Deutsche Börse, the German exchange. The media will talk about it more as if it's a merger, but the reality is the Germans own the New York Stock Exchange. And this is certainly symbolic. I mean, this is going to happen to a lot of our iconic companies. We have basically borrowed all this money to consume when the world no longer wants our debt, our paper, and instead they want to convert their dollars into real assets. A lot more of our companies are going to go up for grabs, and we're going to see a lot more than just the New York Stock Exchange. Many of the major companies, the multinational companies that are listed on the New York Stock Exchange, are also going to be bought out and owned by foreigners. And this is not a good thing. It is a symbol of our demise. I wrote an article about this you can read it on my website at europac.net, called "Another One Bites the Dust." And it came out in January of 2008. And in that article, I described why I thought New York would be the next Detroit, and that I thought we were going to lose the financial service industry the same way we lost the automobile industry. At one time, Detroit was the automobile capital of the world. Now it's just a city that makes cars. There is no capital of the world anymore. There's certainly regional capitals. You got Japan and Asia, you got Germany and Europe, but Detroit is a shadow of its former self, and it lost that edge because government regulations and taxes and union demands made them uncompetitive. They lost their reputation for high quality and low cost, and other countries seized on those attributes. Well, the same thing is happening in Wall Street. We have shattered our reputation. Many of our Wall Street firms have failed, and those that remain have a bad record of really screwing their customers with lousy investment advice. In many cases, you got a lot of conflicts of interest. But more than that, the government over the last decade has layered the financial service industry with so many cumbersome rules and regulations, and so many more on the way as a result of financial reform, that we rendered ourselves uncompetitive relative to exchanges around the world. And also, when America dominated the globe, we had all the savings. So it made sense that capital was allocated here in New York, because after all, that's where it was accumulated. Well, now that's not the case. The savings are being accumulated outside the United States. They're being accumulated in Asia. And so the financial capitals of the world are going to move. They're going to be in Shanghai. They're going to be in Hong Kong. Yes, they'll be in Frankfurt. They'll be in London. They'll be in other countries. New York will just be another city with a stock exchange. But Wall Street is not going to dominate finance the way it did, just like Detroit no longer dominates the automobile world. And this is a shame. This is another industry that we have destroyed ourselves through government regulation and through central banking. It's another major American industry that I believe is in the process of being lost to foreigners. Anyway, don't forget to go to schiffradio.com to really get my full dissection of President Obama's budget. Listen to today's show, and I also talked about it on yesterday's show. Anyway, that's it for now. Take care, everybody. This has been Peter Schiff with the Video Blog. Bye-bye.